Let's rejoin the conversation for part two of my interview with Professor Christoph Benzmueller.
Maybe I could shift gears a little bit. It's a good segue to what do you see as having been in recent years the major advances in higher order logic, and especially because it might address the there's been, I think, a challenge in the community that, at least for me, higher order logic, when you get down to actually working with some of the representations, even just working with software that handles this kind of powerful language, it's kind of challenging. And there are a lot more people that work in less expressive logics, in part because maybe the barrier to entry is a bit lower. So what are the things that are being done that have created some major advances or improvements in higher order logic, including advances that maybe make it a bit more accessible or easier or higher performance? Can you address some of those issues altogether?
Yeah, with the risk, of course, to always forget somebody, and I have to apologize in advance, right? Yeah, so there is a lot of ongoing research in direction of higher order logic recently, and you see that also at the TPTP. Many of the first order systems are now presenting their higher order extensions, and on average, I think in the last 10 years, we did see one new T improver in the area of higher order T improving entering the TPTP competitions per year. Jeff Sutcliffe might correct me here, but I think that is my estimation, what we saw over the last 10 years. But okay, so what were the major developments in the area? Maybe I even in one sentence mentioned the early pioneers. I've mentioned already Church, Alonzo Church, who was important. And then on the semantic side, Henkin semantics, which basically shows you, yes, in principle, we are not really more expressive than first order logic plus a set theory, if you want to say, or sorted first order logic, and but you are more expressive in a practical sense. That is a very important thing. So I think that from theory perspective, you can still say many of the things we can do in higher order can still be done in first order plus set theory, but it would look way more awkward. And also from automation, it would be not as performant. That is what I claim as encodings in higher order. And then, of course, I think very important for automation was the pioneering work by Peter Andrews at the time, and also Gerard Houet. So Peter Andrews with resolution style, and then matrix style T improving. He called it the matings method at the time, but then also Gerard Houet with higher order unification. That's very essential. That is what is very crucial for higher order T improvers. And then there was, of course, early pioneering contributions also by people like the PVS group around Natalia Schenker, about Mike Gordon in the Hall group, and Larry Paulson with Isabel, and many others I should mention here, who actually developed means for mainly interactive T improving, but also tactic-based interactive T improving. So going a little bit in direction of automation. I myself then entered the field with a focus on improving extensionality and equality reasoning in higher order, and to avoid extensionality axioms in the search space. So not to put these principles as axioms, but to provide them by direct rules. And that actually got us in direction of equality T improving, or equational reasoning and ordered power modulation and so on. And here recently in Leo 3, we have made progresses in that direction by the PhD of Alex Steen, who developed the Leo 3 T improver. And then there is much also significant further progress now in direction of really superposition in context of higher order logic, or fragments of higher order logic at least, by the group of Jesmond Plachette in Amsterdam. So I think these are all now recent milestones to mention. And this in combination with a couple of other things that are equally important in my opinion, namely that now first order provers are being integrated in higher order T improvers as subsystems, and also SAT solvers and so on being integrated. So you don't lose on these very important fragments of classical higher order logic in comparison to others, at least not significantly. So you want to be as competitive in first order and propositional reasoning, ideally in a higher order prover, and then add on top of that. That is the picture. And by interacting with state-of-the-art theorem provers, you can do a lot in that direction. Of course, the ideal theorem prover eventually is an tightly combined system, and this you can now more or less see by the bottom-up development and extensions by systems like E, or also by Jasmon's group, where you actually start with first order technology and then extend it in direction of higher order logic. That is an interesting direction to approach the challenges, which I couldn't do, for instance, 15 or 20 years ago, because that would have been too much for a single project. But now with the grown systems, that is a nice opportunity. And then what's wonderful in my own work is actually that we have now interactive theorem provers like Isabel, as an example, but also the others that provide Lean or Hall and so on, that provide bridges to first order provers and bridges that integrate transformations into these framework. I mean, Sledgehammer is just the latest system that is to be mentioned here. There were earlier works that should also be mentioned that were pioneering this direction. So we had the TREM system in the Omega group already in the 90s. It was very similar to the idea of what is Sledgehammer doing today. Or we had before that in the TPS prover, you had already kind of subsystems integrated that were targeting propositional or first order reasoning and were tightly integrated, and similar mechanisms in PVS and others. So Sledgehammer is just one of the latest and excellent tools, and I use it a lot in my formalization work. Why? Because I can then make use of the wonderful interfaces in the interactive theorem provers that automated theorem provers often are lacking, you know, especially at the user interaction side. So you have these wonderful interfaces and also maintenance for building up libraries and so on of formalized knowledge. And you can nevertheless then from these environments where you have very intuitive surface encodings of your formulas, even with LaTeX quality, you can then interact with different theorem provers, like higher order provers that are integrated, but also via these transformation mechanisms and first order theorem provers, and in the end, SAT solvers. So you have all under one hood, which is exactly the tools that we should be working with also in knowledge representation in AI in general in the future, in my opinion. And this is, I think, wonderful developments in the last years that are very important for practical implications. In addition, one thing I want to mention is also this progress by group, also again in connection to machine learning, on relevance filtering. So people, again, like Josef Urban, but also Cesare Kalicic or so, did very important work here to show that when you tackle the relevance question, eventually with machine learning techniques, as they have done, then you can make significant further progress in also attacking reasoning with respect to large theories, where theorem proving in general was suffering. And this is particularly relevant now in the context of interacting with interactive prover systems, because here you have the large knowledge bases in the background, the large libraries, and you want to call your theorem provers. And if you don't have a suitable mechanism that is actually solving the relevance question for you, so to just find a very probable subset of relevant information that you send over to the automated theorem provers. So if you have that, that can really make a difference. And that is another significant development in recent years that we've seen much progress on that end.
Yeah, in a way, this started, it seems to me, with the work that Christoph Hoder did on when I was working with Jeff Sutcliffe on creating the large theory division to do problems on Sumo of his TPTP competition. Christoph Hoder came up with this scheme that would let us just pay attention to a small portion of what is a very large knowledge base, and really a very different problem than what I think a lot of people in logic and theorem proving had been working on. It was sort of hard problems that could be stated in a small number of rules and facts, and then moving to, well, what if we have all the facts we might ever want, all the rules we might ever want about how the world works? How do we do anything practical within that? Because the first thing we need to find is, what are the things that actually are relevant to the question we're asking? And this also, it seems like there's kind of a nice analogy to human reasoning, where people clearly focus, sometimes over focus, on a certain sort of portion of their knowledge as a way to make it practical to come to conclusions about anything complicated.
Yeah, and I fully agree. So the pressure to look into that area was significantly fostered by your initiative at the time to look at the large theories, and then I mean, you were also very active then in fostering the setup of a competition in that direction, and that had a significant impact. And I think it should not be. It was a tremendous development for the field that we probably don't even pay too much attention to in recent papers or so on. And I think that research direction should be further fostered. I'm not sure whether in the last couple of years, so the last 2 or 3 years, there have been so many focusing on that. It was mainly, so as far as I remember, from 2010 to 2016 and 17, when I remember the significant papers and so on, and the background technology, for instance, that's used in Sledgehammer, but maybe some listeners can correct me here. I think this direction should be further fostered, and we should pay attention to it, because once you have the right axioms, I see it so often in the interaction within Sledgehammer, then team improvers are very often up to the tasks, and if you send them too many over, then they are still suffering in information, especially if you're in a higher order context and you send some real higher order information over that's not needed, then you get them eventually on the wrong track, in the wrong direction, and therefore relevance filtering is in particular so important in a higher order context, where you have these pushy search spaces.
Yeah, that's I guess always been, at least in layman's terms, one of the challenges of theorem proving is that it is ultimately search, and the search is really, really hard and highly combinatoric. So anything you can do to focus is really important. And it's also exciting. We should give credit maybe to Joseph Urban again, because of course Christoph Hoder was part of Joseph's lab, and now Joseph is taking this work on relevance filtering from the sort of a rule-based approach that Christoph had started with, and now taking a machine learning based approach to learn what facts might be relevant to a particular query.
Yeah, but these are the works I was referring to. So I think they, exactly. So and integrated nowadays in tools like Sledgehammer, and this is not so visible eventually for many users, but this is highly important.
I'd also like
to direction.
Sorry, I also like to what we were saying essentially about the drawing together of so many different tools. And it seems to me this is part of a certain degree of maturity in a field. You start with everybody's wandering in the wilderness, following many different research tracks, which of course is very important. But now you're also seeing different practical systems coming together with the acknowledgement that we need in interactive mode in theorem proving, because people still have intuitions and can drive things. We also need automatic modes, because machines can be really fast at looking at all possibilities and finding answers in a way that people can't do. And also the understanding of different logics being needed, and bringing all these things kind of into a common framework, seeing E and Vampire adding higher order, and seeing your own work in Leo using E as a client. It seems to me that the field is really at a very exciting point where a lot of different threads are drawing together, both in a theoretical and a practical sense.
Yeah, it's a very highly interesting point right now. And I think the field is eventually ripe now for, say, an analogous investment on a large scale, as we saw it, for instance, say, IBM putting money into the Watson technology at the time to win Jeopardy. And I think that a major investment now at a setup of an integrated, interactive, automated team proving framework with the also with the support for logical pluralism in the way, for instance, I'm supporting it, and others as well, could be a game changer in the area of interactive automated reasoning. But at the moment, we still, I mean, we have some good investments, but not at that scale. So we haven't seen anything similar to what people have put into the direction of sub-symbolic AI, and in the area of symbolic AI in particular, and automated team proving, no such kind of big integrated project has ever been attempted at. I think that focused in particular in the integration of automated team proving technology. Yeah.
Let's pause again here, and we'll return in our next video for part 3 of my conversation with Professor Christoph Benzmueller.